Well, I remember years ago I read it was like a guerrilla marketing book for musicians, and one of the big things that it tried to get you to think is that you can't. And maybe it was different at a different time, but like certainly when I was coming up and playing music, you couldn't think of like your gig as just a gig, because if you think of it as just a gig, then everybody else is going to think of it as a gig. Everything had to be an event in and of itself. Like there has to be a reason they're going to spend their very precious time on you. Like you have to make this a thing that people want to be a part of. And if you approach marketing, you approach everything like from the idea of like we're trying to create something for people to be a part of. You're going to last a lot longer certainly than someone, oh, this is just the next thing I'm shitting out.
Yeah, it just shows how much value you put on your product and how you treat it. So, like you said, if you don't value it, nobody else is going to look at it as it has value. I remember I was hearing Kiss's first show was in some tiny dive in New York City, but they did the whole thing, all the makeup, like everything. They drove there in a limo. It probably cost them way more money to do that show, but they treated it like like they valued it, and I think that's key.
Gene is a terrible human being, but like his, you know, if you've read anything with him talking about the band and like the business side of the band, like there was never a chance of that band not making it because he was going to do whatever it took for that band to make it. I mean, and it's always funny because a lot of people like don't realize even like what he was going for, because with all the makeup and everything, like there's you almost get like a cartoonish feel about the band when his goals were nothing short of being the next Beatles. Like that, he wanted to be the biggest band in the world, and I always laugh about anyone getting compared to the Beatles. Like it's funny, like Muse, I always feel really bad for because they're never even going to be the biggest band in their hometown. Like you guys, I'm sorry, you're from Liverpool. No one will ever
Yeah.
be more famous than another band from Liverpool.
Just move. You should have moved first, and then.
Yeah, really.
Um,
Um, so now you're obviously in the programming side of gaming, but are there things that you noticed from that world that transfer over to like the stuff that you watch your bosses probably mess up? That like, you go, I know I'm not going to do that when I release my comic book.
yeah, I mean, I don't know. They're so different. The worlds just. I don't know. I think the one thing about the comic book, for me at least, is it's one vision, and I think that always is a problem. I worked in advertising for a while, and it was sort of the same idea. Too many cooks in the kitchen, whatever cliche you want to use. But the fact that I'm one person doing everything, whether or not it's the greatest thing in the world isn't the question. Is have I achieved what I set out to do? Like whatever story I had in my head, did it come out? That's sort of how I think about it. I'll let people judge after that, but to me, that's really all I think about when I'm writing, drawing, inking, color. I'm like, is this particular thing I had in my head coming out in the form that I want it to? And if I had, and I did have people push back on that, and in the end, you can't. You have to produce what you imagine, and you really can't let somebody else dictate certain things to you. Now, that doesn't mean you don't take criticism. It doesn't mean you don't collaborate. I'm not saying any of that stuff, but there are some core things about your story that you just have to be true to. Because I think ultimately people see sincerity, and they can really sniff out, if you're pandering or doing something, just to.
Well, I mean, that's why all of our major corporations in the U.S. are like just dive bombing because they've been lying to people for far too long, and people are starting to notice. Like I tout myself as a post corporate marketer because there's no ability to have authenticity in the corporate level anymore. What's so I because you kind of pushed on this, I'm curious. One of the things that I've always been jealous of as a musician with the rappers it's beautiful when you can have like that single vision, but it's also really nice to have a whole bunch of other people that have helped you on a project when it comes to telling people about your project and getting eyes on it. It's like the like that whole. And I think metal bands started doing it for a while, where like they're bringing in like a lead guitar player from every other band that they're friends with, just so that, like they could get them to promote one of the tracks on the record. It's like hip hop guys, they've been doing it for years. Like, oh, we just pull in a guy, and so we got 15 people shilling our album because they're all on it. It is way better than just me and my two buddies that were in the band trying to show on it.
Yeah, I think it depends on the product. I think for Horace H. Hoover in particular, I know, like, going into it, I knew it was going to be a unique project. So I have other ideas, other titles I want to do that are, I'm not going to say they're not unique, but this was a really unique vision, and I knew I had to get this out sort of in precisely the way it needed to be done. So if I brought people on, I think it would have been watered down, or there would have been too much sort of conflict to get that done. In the future, though, man, like, having alternate covers from other artists, which is the same as having, like, featuring somebody on a song, having, guest colors, letters. I do think that it works out, in the long run. Collaboration can sometimes be, better than one person doing everything, because we can't be amazing at everything.
Mm-hmm. Out of curiosity, do you do black and white or color books? Color. Okay. What kind of color is it? We doing like old school color? Or are we doing like a modern, flashy, shining light everywhere, and everything's a weird fucking gradient?
It's definitely old school. So I took the old, I think, a 70s palette, and I just limited myself to that color palette. So I started the book 2018, maybe 2019. And honestly, all I knew was I'm going to try couple different styles, see what works, and then that'll sort of be the process I use in the future. Now, I'm older to the point where me Bronze Age is sort of the ideal. To this day, that's the stuff visually that I like. It's clear. I like the colors. I like the line work. So I gravitated towards Bronze Age simplicity for some things. So, well, I'll try that with the colors. And to me, it worked. It worked for a few reasons. It worked for the character, and it worked for the story. I think if you apply that modern gradient, bloom effect thing everywhere, I don't think it would work for Horace H. Hoover.
Yeah, like Horace H. Hoover's not going to work as like a 90s image comic.
No, and I mean, I don't want
You ever
to
thought,
disparage the 90s, but
so you're not thinking to yourself, man, how cool would this look if Rob Liefeld did it?
no, and I do always feel bad whenever I say stuff about the 90s in image, because some people, that was their first books. So I know they have an attachment to it. So I try not to be negative, but it is like, that's when I jumped off of comics. When that stuff started to hit, it didn't make any sense to me. By the time we got deep into the image stuff, the art, the story, nothing made sense to me at all.
I think image makes up 70% of my current pull list still. So.
The current image?
Yeah, well, either image or what do you call it there? Fly or whatever it is there.
Skybound?
Skybound, that imprint I like stuff on.
Yeah, recently I have been picking up new books. So I feel like things have shifted back or in a good direction.
I like Spawn a lot. So since they've been expanding the Spawn universe, like there's been interesting stuff there. Big Gunslinger Spawn fan. Just the aesthetic of that's cool.
I think out of all of those books, Spawn was probably my favorite. And I think even though McFarlane's art, again, didn't make sense, it still had a cool factor to it.
Well, I think that's always been part of the thing, is that like he kind of threw out a lot of the rules and said, hey, if it looks cool, it's what I'm going to do. Like if you ever look at, he's particularly known for like his Spider-Man webs that don't make any sense whatsoever. Like none of that makes any sense if you're like web sticking it. But man, did it look cool.
Yeah, and I mean, that takes a lot of guts to do that. He wasn't drawing that long before he really pushed it forward.
What's the documentary on him, and he's just an interesting guy. His story in of itself. So, what do you think? What do you want people to get when you've got your documentary about you as a comic book creator? 20 years down the road. What's the cliff notes to that? What's the trailer going to look like?
I mean, I definitely am a more broadly schooled artist that just happened to do comics. So I do 3D modeling and sculpture. I did a lot of illustration, painting. So I do a lot of different disciplines. And then I feel like whenever I decided to focus on comics, I'm bringing that sensibility and some of that stuff into the comics. So I just feel like it has a different look than I'm not trying to copy Mignola or McFarlane or anybody. Like, as much as I love Buscema and I wish I could copy him, I can't help but bring all of that other old stuff into it. My really detailed pen and ink illustration. And so
I think when, as an artist, you approach things, you can't help but just bring what you're going to bring to the table. Like, it's maybe there's guys out there that like are workhorses like Jim Lee or something. They can do whatever they want to do because they're almost like unaffected by the work. It's just a job. But like, not everybody, I guess, has that sort of approach to it. So, well, I want to thank you so much for coming on today, boss. It's been a great conversation, and I hope people go out there, look at the comic. I know I'm definitely going to be buying it because it's absolutely right up my alley.